The meeting room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air system. Jake Morrison sat at the long metal table and looked at the datapad in front of him. The numbers were good. Very good. Human ships had stopped more pirate attacks this quarter than any other Council species. Human soldiers had kept peace on 7 different worlds. Human doctors had saved thousands of lives during the plague on Kepler Station. Jake looked across the table at Council Leader Zephyx. She was tall and blue, with 4 arms that moved like liquid. Her species had ruled this part of space for 3,000 years. She barely looked at Jake when he spoke. The quarterly report shows significant improvements in Sector 7 security, Jake said. His voice was steady and professional. Pirate attacks are down 67% from last year. Trade routes are safer than they have been in decades. Zephyx made a sound that might have been agreement. She did not look up from her own datapad. Your species continues to perform its duties adequately, she said. The word adequately stung. Jake had heard it so many times over the past 5 years. Behind Jake sat Lieutenant Colonel Amy Phillips. She was small and tough with short brown hair and sharp green eyes. Amy had fought in 3 different wars for the Council. She had medals that most Council species did not even have names for. But when she spoke in meetings like this, the Council members looked at her like she was furniture. We also prevented 2 potential conflicts between the mining guilds on Tau Ceti, Amy added. Our negotiation teams worked for 6 weeks to find a solution that satisfied both parties. Zephyx finally looked up. Her large black eyes showed nothing. Yes, we are aware of your diplomatic efforts. They were sufficient. Another word that Jake had grown to hate. Humans had joined the Galactic Council 47 years ago. They had been grateful just to be accepted among the great civilizations of the galaxy. The Altarians were ancient and wise. The Vortakians were fierce warriors. The Crystalline Confederacy had technology that seemed like magic. The Ethereals could see into other dimensions. And humans were useful. They were good at solving problems. They were good at fighting. They were good at fixing things that broke. But they were never important. They were never listened to when they spoke about big decisions. They were tools that the Council used when needed and ignored when not. Jake remembered the first time he had met Zephyx 5 years ago. He had been excited to represent humanity in the Council chambers. He had prepared speeches about human culture and history. He had brought gifts from Earth to share with the other species. Zephyx had accepted the gifts with the same expression she might use when taking out trash. Is there anything else? Zephyx asked. She was already reaching for the next datapad on her desk. Actually, yes, Jake said. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a sealed document. I have a formal proposal regarding the establishment of permanent peacekeeping stations in disputed border regions. Our analysis shows that early intervention could prevent conflicts before they escalate. Zephyx took the document without reading. She set it on a pile of other papers that looked like they had been sitting there for months. We will consider your suggestions, she said. It was the same thing she said every time Jake brought a proposal. Amy shifted in her chair. Jake could see her jaw tighten. She had written most of that proposal. She had spent weeks analyzing conflict patterns and resource distribution. She had identified 17 specific locations where small peacekeeping stations could prevent wars that might kill millions of beings. The proposal would never be read. Jake knew this. Amy knew this. They all knew this. Thank you for your time, Council Leader, Jake said. He stood up and collected his papers. Amy stood beside him. They walked out of the meeting room together. The hallway outside was busy with representatives from dozens of species. The Vortakians moved in groups, their red skin gleaming under the bright lights. They were talking loudly about some military exercise. The crystallines floated past like living gems, their bodies chiming softly as they moved. Everyone had somewhere important to go, everyone except the humans. 47 years, Amy said quietly as they walked toward the human diplomatic section. 47 years of this, Jake nodded. The human section was smaller than most. 3 offices, a small conference room, and a communications center. Other species had entire floors of the council building. Humans had been given space that was originally designed for storage. Jake's aide, Lieutenant Commander Steve Parker, was waiting for them when they reached the office. Steve was young and smart with blonde hair and blue eyes. He had graduated at the top of his class from the Naval Academy. He could have had any assignment he wanted. Instead, he had asked to work in diplomatic service. How did it go? Steve asked, though he already knew from the expressions on their faces. The usual, Jake said. He sat down at his desk and opened his computer. File the report with Earth Command. Mark it as delivered and acknowledged. Steve hesitated. Sir, there was a message from Earth while you were in the meeting. Priority channel, Jake looked up. Priority channel meant something important. Something that could not wait for regular diplomatic communications. What did it say? Steve handed him a datapad. The message was short and encrypted. Jake read it twice too. Make sure he understood. Get me a secure line to Admiral Rodriguez, Jake said. His voice was different now, harder. Amy looked at him with curiosity. Jake, what is it? Protocol 7, Jake said simply. Amy's eyes widened. Protocol 7 was something they had talked about for years but never thought would actually happen. It was the nuclear option? The final solution to a problem that had been growing worse every year. Jake waited while Steve established the secure connection. Admiral Rodriguez appeared on the screen after a few minutes. He was an older man with gray hair and tired eyes. He had been fighting for human interests in the galaxy longer than anyone else alive. Jake, the Admiral said. I assume you received the authorization. Yes, sir. Are we really doing this? The decision has been made at the highest levels. The President signed the order this morning. Every human ship, station, and outpost will receive the same message within the next 6 hours. Amy leaned forward. What about ongoing missions? We have medical teams on 3 plague worlds. We have negotiators working on the Proxima mining. Dispute? All personnel will be recalled immediately, Rodriguez said. No exceptions, no delays. We pack personal items only and leave everything else behind. The Council will demand explanations, Jake said. If the Council will get no explanations, we say nothing. We take nothing that belongs to them, we simply leave. Steve was staring at the screen. Sir, what about the beings who depend on us? The colonies that need our protection? The trade routes that we patrol? Admiral Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. Son, we have been protecting and serving and fixing problems for 47 years. In all that time, has the Council ever once asked what we needed? Have they ever listened to our advice? Have they ever treated us as equals instead of servants? Steve shook his head. Then let them learn what it means to live without us, Rodriguez said. Jake, you have 72 hours to complete the withdrawal. After that, no human presence remains in Council space. The screen went dark. Jake sat back in his chair and looked around the small office. In 3 days it would be empty. In 3 days, humanity would be gone from the Galactic Council forever, and the Council had no idea what was coming. The alarm bells rang through the Vortakian flagship at exactly 0347 Standard Time. Admiral Korvac jumped from his sleeping chamber and ran to the bridge. His red skin was darker than usual, which meant he was either angry or scared. Right now, he was both. Report, he commanded, as he took his position at the center of the bridge. Crimson Talon pirates, sir, his tactical officer replied. 12 ships moving to intercept the medical convoy. They came out of nowhere. Korvac looked at the tactical display. The pirates were using a formation he had never seen before. It was clever and dangerous. In the past, he would have called for the human tactical advisor who always sat in the corner of the bridge. Commander Lisa Chun had been there for 3 years. She knew more about pirate tactics than anyone in the fleet, but Commander Chun was gone. All the humans were gone. They had left 5 days ago without saying goodbye or giving any reason. The empty chair where she used to sit seemed to mock him now. Move to intercept pattern Delta, Korvac ordered. It was a standard Vortakian formation. That had worked well for centuries. The battle lasted exactly 14 minutes. When it was over, 6 medical ships were destroyed, and the pirates had escaped with minimal damage. 30,000 doses of medicine that could have saved lives on the rim worlds were floating in space as debris. Korvac stared at the tactical display in shock. His ships were stronger and faster than the pirate vessels. His crews were well trained. But without the human tactical advice, they had fought like amateurs. The pirates had outmaneuvered them at every turn. 3 star systems away, Council Leader Zephyx was having her own problems. The morning reports were piling up on her desk, and none of them were good. The automated defense network around Altair Prime had crashed again. The same network that had run perfectly for 15 years was now failing every few hours. She called for Engineer Keelix, her best technical advisor. Keelix was old even by Altarian standards. His blue skin was faded and his forearms moved slowly. As he worked, "The human technicians maintained these systems," Keelix said as he studied the error reports. "They made thousands of small improvements over the years. They upgraded software and replaced components before they failed. Now, the systems are running on original settings from decades ago. Can you fix it?" Zephyx asked. Keelix was quiet for a long time. "I can try. But the humans changed so much that I do not understand how it works anymore. They made it better, but they also made it impossible for us to maintain without them." On the other side of Council space, the Ethereal Collective was facing a different problem. High Mystic Velen floated in his meditation chamber, trying to communicate with the Council through the quantum network. But every time he tried to speak, his words came out as random noise. The Ethereals did not speak with voices like other species. They communicated through pure thought and energy. For decades, human translators had served as bridges between the Ethereals and the physical world. The translators had learned to read ethereal thoughts and convert them into words that other species could understand. Now there were no translators. The Ethereals had become isolated in their own mystical realm, unable to participate in the Council. That needed their wisdom more than ever. The first civilian casualties happened on Kepler 442. The massive planet housed 12 million beings from 6 different species. The fusion reactors that powered the planet's cities had been running smoothly for over a century. They were marvels of engineering that produced clean energy without pollution or waste, but the reactors had been maintained by human engineers for the past 20 years. The humans had studied the ancient Altarian designs and improved them in ways that even the original builders did not understand. They had added safety systems and efficiency upgrades that made the reactors work better than they were ever designed to. When the primary reactor in the northern continent began to show warning signs, the Altarian engineers tried to follow the old maintenance procedures. But the procedures no longer matched the actual systems. The humans had changed too much over the years. The reactor overheated and automatically shut down to prevent an explosion. The backup systems tried to compensate, but they had also been modified by human engineers. Within 6 hours, the entire northern continent lost power. 12 million beings were without heat, light, or air recycling. The backup life support systems could only last for 48 hours. Emergency evacuation ships were sent from neighboring systems, but there were not enough ships to move 12 million beings in 2 days. News of the crisis reached Earth within hours. President Karen Walsh sat in the Oval Office and watched the reports with a mixture of sadness and anger. She had been a senator when humanity first joined the Galactic Council. She remembered how excited everyone had been to be part of something bigger than Earth. "How many warnings did we send about single points of failure?" she asked her Chief of Staff, Paul Martinez. Paul looked through his files. 17 formal reports over 8 years. We recommended distributed power systems and cross-training programs for local engineers. Every recommendation was rejected as too expensive or unnecessary. On the screen, they watched as evacuation ships struggled to rescue beings from the failing cities. Children were crying as they were separated from their families. Elderly beings were dying from the cold as life support systems failed. They never listened, Walsh said quietly. Not once in 47 years did they ask for our advice before making policy. They just expected us to clean up their mistakes. The evacuation of Kepler 442b took 6 days. Most of the population was saved, but 3,000 beings died from exposure and system failures. It was the first major civilian disaster in Council space in over a century. The Council emergency session was chaos. Without human administrative staff to keep records and manage translations, the meeting quickly broke down into arguments. The Vortakians blamed the Altarians for poor reactor design. The Altarians blamed the Crystallans for not providing better backup systems. Everyone blamed everyone else, but nobody blamed the humans. Because officially, the humans had just been maintenance workers and security guards. They were not supposed to be important enough to cause system-wide failures when they left. Zephix finally called for order by banging her staff on the podium. "We need solutions, not blame," she announced. "Send delegations to human space. Find out why they left and what it will take to bring them back." But when the delegations arrived at the border of human space, they found something unexpected. The border was closed. Human ships patrolled the edges of their territory and politely but firmly turned away all Council vessels. "We are no longer part of the Galactic Council," the human patrol captain explained. "We have no obligation to provide services or explanations to former associates." The word former hit the Council delegates like a physical blow. The humans were not coming back. They had not left temporarily or in anger. They had left permanently and completely. For the first time in 3,000 years, the Galactic Council was truly alone. A war started over rocks. Stupid rocks on a dead planet that nobody had cared about for 50 years. But the rocks contained rare minerals that both the Vortakian hegemony and the Crystalline Confederacy needed for their ships. The mining dispute in the Proxima system had been going on for months. It was the kind of problem that human negotiators usually solved in a few weeks. They would sit both sides down, look at the survey data, and find a fair way to split the mining rights. Everyone would complain a little but agree in the end, but there were no human negotiators anymore. The Council had assigned the dispute to a committee of Altarian bureaucrats who spent 3 weeks arguing about which conference room to use for meetings. Admiral Korvac of the Vortakian fleet was getting impatient. His ships had been guarding the mining site for 2 months while the politicians talked. His crews were bored and angry. Some of them had started making jokes about how the Crystallans were probably stealing minerals while everyone waited. The Crystalline fleet commander, a being called Resonance of Deep Waters, was equally frustrated. Her people had found the mineral deposit first, but the Vortakians claimed it was in their territory. The border had been disputed for decades, and human mediators had always managed to keep it from becoming a real problem. The incident happened on a Tuesday. A crystalline survey ship entered the disputed zone to take mineral samples. A Vortakian patrol ship ordered it to leave. The crystalline ship refused. Words were exchanged. Insults were traded. Someone fired a warning shot. Within minutes, both fleets were moving toward each other with weapons charged. On Earth, President Walsh was in a meeting with her economic advisors when the reports started coming in. The quantum communication network was carrying news of the first space battle in Council territory in over a century. "Should we intervene?" asked Secretary of Defense Martinez. "We still have ships near the border. We could get there in 6 hours. Walsh shook her head. "We are not members of the Council anymore. Their wars are not our problem." The Battle of Proxima Station lasted 3 hours and 17 minutes. When it was over, 14 ships were destroyed and over 2,000 beings were dead. The mining station itself was completely destroyed, along with all the minerals that both sides had been fighting over. Admiral Korvac survived, but his flagship was badly damaged. He had won the battle but lost half his fleet doing it. The Crystallans had retreated, but they were already calling for reinforcements from their homeworlds. The war spread quickly. Within a week, 7 star systems were involved. The Vortakians attacked crystalline trade routes. The Crystallans retaliated by destroying Vortakian colonies. Both sides demanded that the Council choose sides and provide military support. But the Council had no military of its own. For 47 years, they had relied on human ships and human soldiers to keep the peace. The Council fleets were small and designed for ceremonial duties, not real combat. Zephyx called for emergency sessions every day, but the meetings accomplished nothing. Without human administrative staff, even basic record-keeping was becoming impossible. Important documents were lost. Translation errors caused new arguments. Critical decisions were delayed by bureaucratic confusion. The communication network that connected all Council worlds was failing too. The quantum relay stations had been maintained by human technicians for decades. The stations were incredibly complex machines that required constant adjustment and repair. Without humans to maintain them, sectors of space were going dark one by one. Commander Lisa Chun, formerly stationed on a Council world but now safely aboard the human ship UCS Independence, watched the growing chaos from her new assignment. She was analyzing Council military movements for Earth Command, tracking the deteriorating situation across former Council space. They never learned how their own systems worked, she told Captain Ben Rodriguez as they reviewed the latest intelligence. Reports, we maintained everything for so long that they forgot the basic principles. Captain Rodriguez was a short man with gray hair and kind eyes. He had served on Council ships for 15 years before the withdrawal. I remember trying to train their engineers, he said. They always said it was not necessary because humans would handle the technical work. The food distribution crisis started in the third week. The complex logistics network that fed 847 worlds had been optimized by human coordinators over decades. They had developed efficient shipping routes, managed supply chains, and balanced resource distribution across the galaxy. Without human logistics experts, the system collapsed into chaos. Ships carried food to the wrong destinations. Planets that needed grain received luxury items instead. Worlds that had been fed reliably for decades suddenly faced shortages and rationing. The ethereal collective, unable to communicate with the physical world without human translators, began withdrawing from Council affairs completely. This was a disaster that nobody had anticipated. The ethereals could perceive threats in dimensional space that other species could not even detect. They had prevented 3 major incursions from hostile parallel dimensions over the past 20 years. Now they were silent, trapped in their mystical realm while dangerous things moved in spaces that only they could see. On Tau Ceti, the atmospheric processors that kept 12 billion beings alive began showing critical errors. The machines were ancient but had been perfectly maintained by human environmental engineers. The engineers had not just fixed problems when they occurred. They had prevented problems before they happened, replacing parts and updating software based on patterns that took years to understand. The local Altarian technicians tried to follow the maintenance manuals, but the manuals had not been updated in decades. The actual systems were completely different from what the manuals described. Every human improvement had been made without documenting the changes because the humans were expected to be there forever. When the first atmospheric processor failed, backup systems tried to compensate. But the backup systems had also been modified by human engineers. The cascade failure spread through the network like a disease. Within hours, the entire planetary atmosphere was becoming toxic. Emergency evacuation protocols were activated, but there were not enough ships to move 12 billion beings quickly. The evacuation became a panicked stampede as beings fought for places on outgoing vessels. President Walsh received the reports in her private office. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of thousands dead from system failures. Millions more at risk as infrastructure collapsed across Council space. The galactic civilization that had seemed so stable and advanced was revealing itself to be held together by human expertise and human dedication. Her aide brought her a message from the Council. It was a formal request for humanitarian assistance. They wanted human engineers to help with the evacuations. They promised full diplomatic immunity and substantial payments for services. Walsh read the message twice and then deleted it. Draft a response, she told her aide. Tell them we are not available for emergency services. Suggest they contact their regular maintenance providers. The irony was perfect. For 47 years, humans had been the regular maintenance providers. Now the council was learning what the galaxy looked like without them. The council chamber was half empty when Zephyx called the emergency session. 3 species had already withdrawn from the council completely. The hegemony representatives had not attended a meeting in 2 weeks. Even the ancient Altarians were talking about leaving to focus on their own worlds. Zephyx looked around the mostly vacant chamber and felt something she had never experienced before. Fear, real fear, that everything her people had built over 3,000 years was falling apart. We need to send a delegation to human space, she announced to the few representatives who remained. We need to find out what it will take to restore relations. Admiral Thrakex of the Vortakian fleet stood up slowly. His red skin was pale from exhaustion. He had been fighting the war with the crystallines for 6 weeks and losing badly. With respect, Council Leader, what makes you think they will even speak to us? Because they are reasonable beings, Zephyx replied, though she did not sound convinced. They served the Council faithfully for decades. Surely they can be persuaded to return. Scientist Keelix raised one of his 4 arms. What do we offer them? What do they want that we have not already given? The question hung in the air like poison. The truth was that nobody knew what humans wanted because nobody had ever bothered to ask. They had been treated like useful servants, not like people with their own needs and desires. We will offer them full membership, Zephyx said finally. Equal voting rights. Representation on all major committees, whatever they require. The delegation left for human space 3 days later. Thrakex commanded the diplomatic ship with Keelix as the senior technical advisor. They brought gifts and formal apologies and offers of partnership that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. The journey to human space took 4 days through areas that had once been safe and prosperous. Now they were dangerous zones, where pirates and raiders attacked anyone who looked weak. The council ship had to travel with a full military escort just to reach the human border. When they arrived at the edge of human territory, they found something that shocked them completely. The border was not just closed, it was fortified. Human ships patrolled in formations that looked nothing like the old council fleet patterns. The ships themselves were sleek and advanced, with weapon systems that made council technology look primitive. Request permission to enter human space for diplomatic talks. Thrakex broadcast on the standard diplomatic frequency. The response came from a human captain whose voice was polite but cold. State your business and credentials. I am Admiral Thrakex of the Vortakian hegemony, representing the Galactic Council. We request an audience with human leadership to discuss restoration of diplomatic relations. There was a long pause. Please maintain your current position. A diplomatic escort will arrive shortly. The escort was a single human ship, smaller than the council diplomatic vessel, but obviously more advanced. It guided them through the border defenses to a space station that took Thrakex's breath away. New Geneva Station was huge, easily 10 times larger than any council facility. It orbited a beautiful blue and green world that looked like a paradise. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, with rotating sections and gleaming metal surfaces that reflected the light of the local star. But what truly amazed Thrakex was the activity level. Hundreds of ships moved in and out of the station. Cargo vessels, passenger liners, exploration ships, and military craft all operated in perfect coordination. The traffic control was so efficient that there were no delays or confusion despite the massive volume. How many people live here? Keelix asked as their ship docked. The human escort captain, a woman named Commander Sarah Walsh, smiled proudly. New Geneva supports about 50 million permanent residents, plus another 10 million who work here temporarily. It is one of our smaller stations. Thrakex tried to process that information. This single facility was larger and more advanced than most council world capitals, and the humans called it small. They were met at the docking bay by President Karen Walsh herself. She was a woman in her 60s with gray hair and intelligent eyes. She wore a simple blue suit that looked nothing like the elaborate robes that council leaders preferred. "Welcome to New Geneva," she said with professional courtesy. "I understand you wish to discuss diplomatic matters." Thrakex had expected to meet with a minor official or ambassador. The fact that the human head of state had come in person was either a very good sign or a very bad one. "Thank you for agreeing to see us, Madam President. We come with an urgent request from the Galactic Council." President Walsh led them through corridors that were clean and efficient but not designed to impress visitors. The walls showed images of human worlds and achievements, but there were no grand displays of wealth or power like in council facilities. "I hope you do not mind if we skip the formal ceremonies," Walsh said as they walked. "We have found that direct discussion is more productive than elaborate protocols." They entered a conference room that was comfortable but plain. Walsh sat across from them at a simple table with two human advisors. One was an older man in a military uniform. The other was a younger woman with the bearing of a scientist or engineer. "Now then," Walsh said, "what can we do for you?" Thrakex had prepared a long speech about mutual cooperation and shared interests. Instead, he found himself speaking plainly. "The Council is failing. Without human support, our systems are collapsing. We need your help." Walsh nodded as if this was not surprising news. "We are aware of the difficulties you are experiencing. What specifically are you requesting?" "Return to the Council," Thrakex said. "Resume your previous roles. We are prepared to offer full membership with voting rights equal to the founding species." The room was quiet for a long moment. Walsh looked at her advisors and then back at the council delegation. "Admiral, with respect, I think you misunderstand our current situation," she said gently. "We are no longer the same people who left council space 2 months ago. We have grown beyond the roles you want us to fill." Keelix leaned forward. "What do you mean?" The military advisor, who had been introduced as General Martinez, spoke for the first time. "We have established colonies in 14 new star systems since leaving council space. Our exploration fleets have discovered resources and territories that make council space look small. Our technology has advanced more in 2 months than it did in 20 years under council restrictions." Walsh gestured toward a wall display that showed a map of local space. The human territory was marked in blue. It was much larger than Thrakex had expected, stretching in directions that the Council had never explored. "We are not the same species that sought acceptance in your Council 47 years ago," Walsh continued. "We have become something different, something independent. We do not need Council approval to explore new worlds or develop new technologies." Thrakex felt his hopes crumbling. "But surely you recognize the value of cooperation, the benefits of trade and cultural exchange." "Absolutely," Walsh agreed. "We are open to trade agreements and cultural programs with any species that treats us as equals. But we will never again accept subordinate status in someone else's organization." The meeting continued for 3 hours, but the outcome was clear from the beginning. The humans were not coming back. They had moved beyond the council and had no interest in returning to their old roles as maintenance workers and security guards. When the council delegation finally left, they carried with them an offer of friendship and trade between equals. But they also carried the devastating news that humanity was no longer available to hold the galaxy together. 6 months had passed since the humans left, and the galaxy looked completely different. The great Galactic Council that had ruled space for 3,000 years was now just a shadow of its former self. Only 12 species remained as active members, down from the original 43 that had once made the council chamber ring with dozens of different voices. Zephix sat alone in her office, reading reports that grew worse each day. The war between the Vortakians and Crystallans had finally ended, but only because both sides were too exhausted and broken to continue fighting. 3 entire star systems had been abandoned as uninhabitable. Billions of beings had been forced to relocate to overcrowded refugee camps on distant worlds. The infrastructure failures had stabilized at a new level that nobody wanted to accept. Communication between worlds now took days instead of hours. Food shipments arrived weeks late, if they arrived at all. Medical supplies were rationed like precious metals. The smooth efficiency that had once connected nearly 1,000 worlds was gone, replaced by a patchwork system that barely functioned, but the most painful reports were about the species that had left the Council entirely. The hegemony had withdrawn to focus on rebuilding their own worlds. The ethereals had disappeared completely, retreating to their dimensional realm and severing all contact with physical reality. 3 smaller species had simply announced that they were seeking new alliances. Outside Council space, the worst part was that Zephyx knew exactly where they were going. Human traders had been spotted in former Council territory, offering deals and partnerships that the Council could no longer provide. Human medical ships were helping with humanitarian crises that Council forces could not handle. Human exploration. Vessels were mapping regions of space that the Council had always claimed were too dangerous to explore. A soft chime indicated someone was requesting entry to her office. "Come in," she called, expecting another disaster report. Instead, Admiral Thrakex entered, looking older and more tired than she had ever seen him. His red skin had lost its vibrant color, and his movements were slow with exhaustion. The war with the crystallines had aged him beyond his years. "Council leader," he said formally, "I have received another communication from human space." Zephyx felt her heart sink. Over the past month, several more species had contacted human territory directly, bypassing the Council entirely. Each time, the humans had been polite but clear that they would only negotiate with individual species, not with the Council as a whole. "What do they want now?" she asked. Thrakex looked uncomfortable. "It is not a request, it is an offer. The humans are willing to establish formal diplomatic relations with the remaining Council species, but only as separate negotiations with each government." The implication was clear. The humans were treating the Council members as individual species rather than as parts of a unified galactic government. They were essentially declaring that the Galactic Council no longer existed as a meaningful political entity. "And our response?" Zephyx asked, though she already knew what it would have to be. "Several species have already accepted. The Altarians signed a trade agreement yesterday. The hegemony is negotiating for technical assistance with their damaged worlds. Even some of our own people are asking why we have not done the same." Zephyx stood and walked to her window, looking out at the Council station that had once been the center of galactic civilization. The docking bays that had always been filled with ships from dozens of worlds were nearly empty now. The corridors that had echoed with the voices of diplomats and traders were quiet and cold. But she thought about the message that had arrived that morning from President Walsh. It had been addressed to her personally, not to the Council as an organization. The message was simple and respectful, offering to discuss humanitarian aid for the refugee crises and technical assistance for critical infrastructure repairs, but the message had made it clear that such discussions would be between the human government and individual species governments. There was no recognition of the Council's authority to negotiate on behalf of its members. The humans were treating the Council like a failed organization that no longer had any real power. The terrible thing was that they were right. On Earth, President Walsh was reviewing the latest intelligence reports from former Council space. The pictures showed the reality that most Council species were trying to ignore. Abandoned space stations drifted dark and empty. Trade routes that had been busy for centuries were now haunted by pirates and scavengers. Entire worlds had reverted to pre-space flight technology because they could not maintain the systems that connected them to galactic civilization. "How many formal requests have we received this week?" Walsh asked her Chief of Staff. Paul Martinez checked his notes. 14 species have requested either diplomatic relations or humanitarian assistance. 3 more have asked about joining. Human space has protected territories, Walsh nodded. The pattern had been consistent for months. As Council authority collapsed, Individual species were reaching out to humanity for the stability and expertise they had once taken for granted. But humanity was no longer the desperate newcomer species seeking acceptance. They were now the dominant power in this region of space, and they could afford to be selective about their partnerships. "What about our exploration program?" Walsh asked. "The survey teams have identified 23 new systems suitable for colonization. 6 already have established human settlements. The mineral wealth we have discovered in the past 6 months exceeds anything available in former council space." The irony was remarkable. While the council had treated humans as useful servants, humanity had been quietly developing the capabilities to surpass their former masters. The restrictions that had kept humans in subordinate roles had also motivated them to become completely self-sufficient. Commander Lisa Chun, now serving as Director of Galactic Affairs, entered the room with a stack of documents. "We have 3 more requests for technical assistance," she reported. "The Vortakians need help rebuilding their shipyards. The Crystallans want our help with their communication networks. The Altarians are asking for medical support for radiation sickness from their reactor failures." "Our response?" Walsh asked. "Same. As always, we are willing to provide assistance through bilateral agreements with individual governments. We charge fair prices for our services, and we expect to be treated as equals in all negotiations." It was a far cry from the days when humans had begged for council membership and accepted whatever scraps of recognition they were offered. Now, other species came to them as supplicants, offering valuable resources and territorial concessions in exchange for the technical expertise and organizational skills that had once been taken for granted. The final message from Council Space arrived on a Tuesday morning. It was from Zephix herself, writing in her personal capacity rather than as council leader. The message was simple and direct. "The Galactic Council formally recognizes human independence and sovereignty. We apologize for our past treatment of your people and request consideration for future diplomatic relations." Walsh read the message twice before responding. Her reply was equally direct. "The human government acknowledges your message and appreciates the sentiment. We remain open to discussions with all species that approach us with respect for our independence and equality." There was no mention of the Council as an organization. No recognition of their former authority. The humans had moved beyond needing council approval for anything they wanted to do. The galaxy had a new order now, one where humanity stood as the dominant technological and military power. The species that had once dismissed humans as useful servants now competed for human attention and assistance. The council that had ruled space for millennia was reduced to writing apology letters to the species they had once considered beneath their notice. The humans had left without a word, and the council had indeed been left to suffer the consequences of their own arrogance.